In 1893, at a photography studio in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, a photograph was taken of two young siblings, a boy approximately 8 years old and his younger sister, about 5 years old. The photograph shows what appears to be a tender moment of childhood affection. The boy is standing beside his seated sister, holding out a single white flower toward her, as if offering her a gift. His expression appears gentle and caring. The little girl sits peacefully in a chair, her hands folded neatly in her lap, appearing to accept this sweet gesture from her loving brother. For over 130 years, this photograph existed in historical archives as a charming example of Victorian sibling affection. A touching image of a protective older brother offering his little sister a flower, capturing a moment of innocent childhood love. But in 2024, when this photograph was submitted for advanced digital restoration and ultra-high-resolution scanning as part of a project to preserve 19th century American photography, specialists discovered something in the enhanced image that transformed this seemingly sweet portrait into something profoundly heartbreaking and tragic. The restoration revealed details that had been invisible for 131 years. Details hidden in shadows, in positioning, in the subtle aspects of the photograph that only modern enhancement technology could recover. What appeared to be a brother giving his sister a flower as a loving gift was actually something entirely different. A final goodbye, a funeral offering, a moment of unbearable grief captured forever. And the flower in his hand wasn't a present at all. Subscribe now. Because this photograph tells a story about loss, about how Victorian families tried to preserve one last moment of normalcy, even in their darkest hour, and about a brother's final gesture to his sister, who was already gone. The photograph arrived at the Library Company of Philadelphia in March 2024 as part of a collection of Victorian-era family photographs donated by the estate of Helen Bradley, whose family had lived in Philadelphia for over 2 centuries. Among dozens of typical Victorian images, formal family groups, wedding portraits, children in Sunday clothes, this particular photograph immediately caught the attention of archivists for its apparent emotional warmth and tenderness. The image showed 2 children photographed in what was clearly a professional studio setting. The background was a painted backdrop showing a subtle pattern, standard for Victorian portrait studios. The lighting was natural and well executed, creating good tonal contrast and depth. The composition centered on 2 children, clearly siblings based on their similar features and the intimate positioning. The younger child, a girl appearing to be approximately 5 years old, sat in an upholstered chair with carved wooden details. She wore a beautiful white dress, expensive-looking, with delicate lace, careful pleating, and silk ribbons. The dress was pristine and perfectly arranged. Her light-colored hair was styled with curls and adorned with a white ribbon bow. The girl sat very still and formally in the chair, her small hands folded neatly in her lap, fingers intertwined in a precise, careful way. Her posture was upright and composed, the kind of formal positioning that Victorian children were taught for portrait photography. Her head was tilted very slightly, and her eyes were closed, giving her a peaceful, restful appearance, as if she had fallen asleep during the long photographic exposure, or perhaps was simply resting her eyes. Standing beside the chair was an older boy, appearing to be approximately 8 years old. He wore a dark, formal suit with a white shirt and collar, typical boys' clothing for formal Victorian photographs. His hair was neatly combed and parted. He stood close to his sister's chair, positioned slightly to her side and facing toward her. Most touching was what he was doing. The boy was holding a single white flower. It appeared to be a lily or similar bloom, and extending it toward his sister. His arm was outstretched, offering the flower to her, his hand positioned near hers, as if presenting her with a gift. The gesture looked tender and caring, the natural affection of a protective older brother giving his little sister a flower. The boy's expression, visible in profile as he looked toward his sister, appeared gentle and caring. His focus was on her, not on the camera, which gave the image an intimate, candid quality unusual for formal Victorian portraits. Everything about the photograph suggested a sweet moment captured between loving siblings, an older brother offering his younger sister a flower, perhaps to cheer her up, perhaps as a spontaneous gesture of affection, perhaps simply as part of the photographer's direction to create a charming portrait. On the back of the photograph, written in faded ink, Thomas and Alice, Philadelphia, September 1893, brother and sister. Dr. Elizabeth Morgan, the senior archivist cataloging the Bradley donation, made her initial assessment with genuine appreciation. Remarkably sweet example of Victorian sibling photography. Unusual to see such an apparently candid gesture in formal studio photography of this era. The boy offering the flower to his sister creates a touching narrative element. The composition is sophisticated and emotionally engaging. The girl appears to be resting peacefully, while her brother offers her a flower, charming and tender. Excellent condition for age. Recommend for high-resolution scanning and possible feature in exhibition on Victorian family life. Dr. Morgan was particularly struck by the emotional quality of the image. Most Victorian photographs showed stiff, formal poses with subjects staring directly at the camera. This image had something different, a sense of interaction, of relationship, of genuine affection between the children. She scheduled the photograph for priority high-resolution scanning, expecting it to be one of the highlights of their collection. A beautiful example of how Victorian photography could capture tender family moments. She had no idea that when the photograph was scanned at ultra-high resolution and analyzed under extreme digital magnification, this tender moment would reveal itself as something heartbreaking, and that the flower being offered was not a gift of love, but a funeral offering to a child who was already dead. Dr. James Patterson, the museum's digital imaging specialist, began the high-resolution scanning process on the photograph of Thomas and Alice. As he worked with the image at increasingly higher magnifications, recovering details that were invisible in the original faded print, he began to notice things that made him progressively more troubled. The first detail that caught his attention was the girl's posture. At normal viewing, she appeared to be sitting formally in the chair, with good Victorian posture. But when Dr. Patterson examined the positioning at high magnification, something seemed wrong about how she was sitting. Her spine was perfectly vertical, unnaturally so. There was no natural curve, no slight lean to one side or the other, no settling of weight into the chair. She appeared to be held in an absolutely rigid, upright position, as if something behind the chair was supporting her back and keeping her perfectly straight. When Dr. Patterson enhanced the shadows and darker areas behind the chair, he could see faint indications of what appeared to be some kind of frame or stand positioned directly behind her, the kind of support structure that Victorian photographers used to help subjects remain still during long exposures, but positioned in a way that suggested it was doing more than just helping. It appeared to be actually holding her upright. He then examined the girl's hands, folded in her lap. At extreme magnification, the hands appeared too still, too precisely positioned. They weren't just folded, they were placed in a very specific way and showed absolutely no natural tension or relaxation. The fingers were intertwined exactly, precisely, with no variation or movement. They appeared to have been carefully arranged, and then left in exactly that position. Most troubling was the girl's face. Her eyes were closed, which at normal viewing gave her a peaceful, resting appearance. But Wender-Patterson enhanced the facial details at maximum magnification. The closed eyes began to look different. The eyelids appeared too smooth, too perfectly closed, with subtle indications around the edges that suggested they might have been manually positioned, held closed or secured in some way. Her skin tone, when analyzed carefully in the enhanced image, appeared notably pale, paler than her brother's, with a slight waxy quality that seemed wrong even accounting for the black and white photography and Victorian indoor complexions. Dr. Patterson then turned his attention to the boy, Thomas, and his gesture of offering the flower. At normal viewing, it appeared sweet and natural, but at extreme magnification, examining every detail, the gesture began to seem less spontaneous and more carefully posed. The flower itself was positioned very precisely, held at an exact angle, extended toward the girl in a very specific way. Thomas's hand holding the flower appeared tense, the grip tight, not the casual, relaxed way someone would hold a flower they were giving as a casual gift. Most significantly, when Dr. Patterson examined Thomas's face at high magnification, what had appeared to be a gentle, caring expression revealed itself as something else entirely. Thomas's eyes, visible in profile, appeared to be red and swollen, the telltale signs of recent crying. His jaw appeared clenched, his facial muscles tense. The expression wasn't gentle contentment, it was barely controlled grief. The tender expression was actually a child trying desperately hard not to cry, trying to maintain composure for the photograph, struggling to complete this terrible final task. Dr. Patterson examined the flower more carefully. In Victorian symbolism, white flowers, especially lilies, had specific meanings. White lilies were strongly associated with funerals, with death, with mourning. They were the flowers placed on coffins, held at gravesides, offered to the deceased. A white lily wasn't typically a gift given between living siblings. It was a funeral flower. Dr. Patterson sat back from his monitor, feeling cold understanding settling over him. He had seen enough Victorian post-mortem photographs to recognize the signs. The perfectly rigid posture, the support frame behind the chair, the closed eyes that had been manually positioned, the waxy pallor, the absolute stillness. Alice wasn't resting. She wasn't sleeping. She was dead. And Thomas wasn't giving his sister a flower as a sweet gesture. He was offering a funeral lily to his dead sister's body, participating in one final posed photograph before she was placed in her coffin. "Dr. Morgan," Dr. Patterson said when he called the senior archivist, his voice quiet and sad. "I think you need to see the enhanced scans. This isn't a photograph of siblings giving flowers. This is a memorial photograph. The little girl is deceased, and her brother is saying goodbye." Dr. Morgan came to the imaging lab immediately. As Dr. Patterson walked her through the enhanced high-resolution scans, showing her the details that had emerged, her initial appreciation for the sweet photograph transformed into heartbroken understanding. Together, they examined every detail under magnification. The support frame behind Alice became clearly visible, a substantial metal structure designed to hold a body upright in a seated position. The positioning of her hands showed no living muscle tension. Her closed eyelids showed clear signs of manual positioning. Her skin tone displayed the distinctive pallor of death. "You're right," Dr. Morgan said quietly. "This is a post-mortem photograph. Alice is deceased." And they posed her brother offering her a funeral flower as part of the memorial portrait. They immediately began researching Philadelphia death records from September 1893, searching for any child named Alice who died around that time and had a brother named Thomas. Death certificates from Philadelphia in September 1893 revealed Alice Marie Hartwell, Age 5 years, 3 months. Date of death, September 19th, 1893. Cause, diphtheria. Address, Society Hill, Philadelphia. Census records showed the Hartwell family living in Philadelphia's Society Hill neighborhood. The father, Robert Hartwell, worked as a bank clerk, a respectable middle-class profession. The mother, Catherine Hartwell, was listed as keeping house. They had 2 children, Thomas Robert Hartwell, age 8, and Alice Marie Hartwell, age 5. Diphtheria was one of the most feared childhood diseases of the Victorian era. The bacterial infection caused a thick membrane to form in the throat, making breathing difficult and often leading to suffocation. Before antitoxin treatment was developed, which wouldn't be widely available until the early 1900s, diphtheria killed approximately 40 to 50% of infected children, often within days of symptom onset. Medical records from Philadelphia in September 1893 showed a diphtheria outbreak affecting multiple children in the city. Parish records indicated that 4 other children died of diphtheria in the same neighborhood during the same 2-week period. The photograph, according to its dating of September 1893, was almost certainly taken within 1 to 2 days of Alice's death on September 19th, the standard timing for Victorian memorial photography, when bodies needed to be photographed quickly before decomposition made it impossible to achieve a peaceful, lifelike appearance. Research into Victorian photographers in Philadelphia revealed several studios that advertised memorial photography services. One photographer, William Bradford, who operated a studio on Chestnut Street, had newspaper advertisements from 1893 that specifically mentioned memorial portraiture, artistic remembrance photography, family groupings with deceased, sensitive direction for grieving families. The phrase, family groupings with deceased, was significant. It meant that living family members could be posed with the deceased for memorial photographs, exactly what the Hartwell photograph showed. Further research uncovered something even more heartbreaking. Victorian etiquette books and photographers' manuals from the 1890s specifically discussed how to pose memorial photographs that included living siblings with deceased children. One photography manual from 1891 advised, when photographing a deceased child with living siblings, position the living child in a gesture of affection or offering toward the deceased. This creates a narrative of continuing love and family bonds that survives death. Common poses include living child holding the deceased child's hand, placing a hand on the deceased child's shoulder, or offering flowers, particularly white lilies or roses, to the deceased. These poses comfort grieving families by showing that sibling love continues even beyond death. The Hartwell family had followed this exact advice. They had posed Thomas offering Alice a white lily, a funeral flower, a symbol of death and mourning, but also a final gesture of brotherly love. The photograph was meant to show that Thomas's love for his sister continued even though she was gone, that he was offering her this flower as a final goodbye. For Thomas, an 8-year-old boy who had just lost his sister, this photograph session must have been unbearable. Standing beside his dead sister's carefully posed body, holding out a funeral flower, trying not to cry, trying to maintain composure while the photographer arranged everything and completed the long exposure. The photograph that seemed to show a sweet moment of siblings sharing a flower actually showed an 8-year-old boy saying goodbye to his dead 5-year-old sister in the only way his family could preserve, through photography. As Dr. Patterson continued the restoration process, enhancing every detail to maximum clarity, the full reality of how this memorial photograph was created became undeniably clear and profoundly sad. The support framework holding Alice's body became completely visible in the enhanced images. It was an elaborate posing stand, a metal frame with multiple adjustable supports positioned behind the chair. The main vertical support ran directly up Alice's back, hidden by the chair's high back and her dress. Secondary supports appeared to be positioned at her neck, concealed by her hair and dress collar, and possibly at her waist, hidden by the dress's sash. Without this framework, Alice's body could not have maintained the upright seated position. There was no muscle tension, no core strength, no living ability to sit upright. The stand was literally holding her in the chair, maintaining the formal Victorian sitting pose. Her hands, folded in her lap, showed clear evidence of post-mortem arrangement when examined at extreme magnification. The fingers had been carefully positioned, intertwined in a specific pattern, and remained exactly as placed. There was absolutely no muscle tone, no natural tension or relaxation, just the positioned arrangement of a deceased child's hands. Alice's face, when enhanced to show maximum detail, revealed the unmistakable signs of death. Her skin had the distinctive waxy pallor characteristic of death, not just pale but with a translucent, slightly grayish quality that no living person has. Her lips showed a slight bluish tinge, visible even in the black and white photograph. Her closed eyelids showed clear evidence of manual positioning. There were subtle pressure marks at the corners of the eyes, and slight irregularities in the eyelid surface that suggested they had been held closed, possibly with small adhesive or by being gently pressed and secured during the photograph. Most heartbreaking were the enhanced details of Thomas himself. The restoration revealed aspects of his grief that had been nearly invisible in the faded original, but became clear in the enhanced image. Thomas's face, examined at high magnification, showed unmistakable signs of crying. His eyes were red and swollen, with moisture visible on his cheeks, tear tracks that hadn't fully dried. His jaw was clenched tight, his facial muscles showing extreme tension as he struggled to maintain composure. His hand, holding the white lily, showed white knuckles from the intensity of his grip. He was holding that flower with desperate tightness, not the casual grip of giving a gift, but the desperate clutch of a child trying to hold on to something, trying to complete a terrible task, trying not to fall apart. The lily itself, when examined closely, appeared to have been freshly cut. It was in perfect bloom, carefully chosen. White lilies were expensive funeral flowers in 1893. The Hartwell family had purchased this lily specifically for this photograph, specifically for Thomas to offer to his dead sister. The positioning of Thomas's arm, extending the flower toward Alice, appeared stiff and unnatural when examined carefully. This wasn't a spontaneous gesture. This was a pose that had been carefully directed by the photographer, with Thomas instructed exactly where to stand, exactly how to hold the flower, exactly how to position his arm to create the desired composition. Background details that emerged in the enhanced restoration added final confirmation. Partially visible at the edge of the frame, nearly invisible in the faded original but recoverable through digital enhancement, were what appeared to be other white flowers, more lilies or roses, positioned just outside the photograph's main composition. These were almost certainly funeral flowers, ready to be placed in Alice's coffin after the photograph was completed. In the darkest shadows of the background, barely visible even in the enhanced image, there appeared to be the edge of what might be a coffin, positioned nearby, waiting. The photograph that had seemed to show a brother giving his sister a flower revealed itself as a carefully staged memorial scene. A deceased 5-year-old girl held upright by a metal frame, her 8-year-old brother forced to pose offering her a funeral lily, with her coffin waiting in the shadows, all captured in one final photograph before she was buried forever. It wasn't a gift. It was a goodbye. With the photograph's true nature confirmed, Dr. Morgan intensified her research into the Hartwell family and the heartbreaking story behind this memorial portrait. What she discovered added profound emotional context to an already devastating image. The Hartwell family's tragedy was documented in surviving family letters and records preserved in Philadelphia historical collections. Alice Marie Hartwell became ill on September 15, 1893, with symptoms of diphtheria, high fever, severe sore throat, difficulty breathing. Despite the family's attempts to get medical care, and their middle-class status meant they could afford a doctor, Alice died 4 days later on September 19, 1893. According to a letter written by Catherine Hartwell to her sister on September 21, 1893, "Our precious Alice was taken from us on Tuesday evening. The diphtheria came so suddenly and took her so quickly. Thomas is inconsolable. He keeps asking why his sister won't wake up, why she had to leave him. The doctor says we must have her buried quickly because of the contagion. We are having a photograph made tomorrow, so we will always remember our angel." The photograph made tomorrow referred to the memorial portrait taken on September 22, 1893, 3 days after Alice's death, 1 day before her burial on September 23rd. Dr. Morgan found records from photographer William Bradford's studio that provided heartbreaking details about the photograph session. Bradford's business ledger for September 22, 1893, included an entry: memorial portrait, Hartwell family, 2 subjects, deceased child seated, living sibling with flower. Fee, 12 shillings. Special posing required. Extended session due to child's distress. The notation, extended session due to child's distress, was devastating in its implications. Thomas, age 8, had been so upset during the photograph session that it took extended time to get him calm enough to complete the photograph. The photographer had to work with a grieving 8-year-old boy who was being asked to pose with his dead sister's body, to hold out a flower to her, to look at her, to participate in this horrible final tableau. The 12-shilling fee was significant, roughly equivalent to 2 weeks' wages for a bank clerk like Robert Hartwell. This was an enormous expense for the family, representing significant financial sacrifice. But for the Hartwell family, like many Victorian families who lost children, this memorial photograph would be the only image they ever had of Alice, and the only photograph of Thomas and Alice together. Research revealed that Thomas Hartwell survived to adulthood. Census records show him as a clerk in 1910, married with children of his own by 1920. He lived until 1957, dying at age 72. Remarkably, a brief mention of Thomas appeared in a 1952 oral history interview conducted with elderly Philadelphia residents about Victorian childhood. Thomas, then 67 years old, briefly mentioned his sister. "I had a little sister who died when I was 8. Diphtheria. They made me stand with her for a photograph after she died, holding a flower out to her. I remember it so clearly. I knew she was gone. I knew she couldn't see the flower, but they told me to hold it out to her anyway, to stand there and not cry while the photographer worked. I've never forgotten that moment. It was the last time I was close to her. The photograph was hard to look at for many years, but my mother treasured it. She said it showed that I loved my sister even after she was gone." The photograph remained in the Hartwell family through multiple generations, passed down through Thomas's descendants. It was eventually inherited by Helen Bradley, Thomas's great-granddaughter, who donated it to the Library Company of Philadelphia in 2024 as part of her family's historical papers, never realizing its true nature as a post-mortem photograph. The photograph of Thomas and Alice Hartwell, properly understood, becomes something more than just a Victorian curiosity or an example of now obsolete memorial photography practices. It becomes a document of a child's grief, of a family's desperate attempt to to preserve one final moment with their lost daughter, and of an 8-year-old boy's unbearable final task, offering a flower to his dead sister while trying not to cry. Victorian memorial photography, especially photographs that included living children posed with deceased siblings, seems particularly heartbreaking to modern viewers. We can barely imagine asking a grieving 8-year-old to pose with his dead sister's body, to extend a flower to her, to participate in creating this permanent record of loss. But for the Hartwell family in 1893, this photograph served multiple purposes. It was the only image they would ever have of Alice. It was the only photograph of their 2 children together. And it was a way to preserve the idea that Thomas's love for his sister survived her death, that even though she was gone, the bond between siblings remained. The flower Thomas offered to Alice wasn't random. White lilies symbolized purity, innocence, and the soul's return to God. By having Thomas offer Alice a lily, the family was creating a symbolic narrative. The innocent child offering the departed innocent child a symbol of her journey to heaven. For Thomas, holding out that flower while standing beside his dead sister, the symbolism probably meant nothing. He was an 8-year-old boy who had lost his playmate, his sister, his companion. The photograph captured his grief even as it tried to create a peaceful memorial scene. The photograph that seemed to show a sweet moment of a brother giving his sister a flower actually showed something much sadder. A child saying goodbye to someone he loved, offering her one final gift that she would never receive, standing beside her one last time before she was placed in a coffin and buried forever. The restoration didn't just reveal technical details about post-mortem photography. It revealed the human heart of the image, the grief, the love, the desperate attempt to preserve connection even in the face of death, the unbearable burden placed on a child who was told to pose with his dead sister and not cry. Thomas Hartwell lived 64 more years after that photograph was taken. He grew up, married, had children, built a life. But in that photograph, he remains forever 8 years old, forever standing beside his sister, forever holding out that white lily, forever caught in that moment of grief disguised as affection, forever saying goodbye. And Alice remains forever 5 years old, forever seated peacefully, forever receiving that flower from her brother, forever preserved in the way her family wanted to remember her, not as death, but as their daughter, their sister, their angel, who simply looked like she was resting. The photograph isn't about death, ultimately. It's about love that tried to deny death, about memory preserved through the only means available, about a family's need to have one final image that showed their children together, their love intact, even though one of them was already gone. When we look at this photograph now, knowing what it really shows, we're not seeing Victorian morbidity or strange customs. We're seeing universal human grief, the same grief parents and siblings feel today when they lose someone they love. We're seeing the same desperate need to preserve connection, to have one more moment, to create one final memory. The photograph that seemed sweet at first glance turned out to be heartbreaking. But in that heartbreak, there is also something profoundly human and recognizable. Love that refuses to let go, memory that preserves what is lost, and a brother who, even in his grief, offered his sister one final flower, a gesture of love that has lasted 131 years and counting.